Welcome to the All of You podcast, where we believe healthy relationships are created by growing individually and pursuing a healthy relationship with yourself.
So let's take a deep breath. Settle in and grow together. I have to start today with a little confession.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I did not know this.
No, you didn't.
This is lovely.
Because confessing is not always fun. So, I'll actually start by saying what we're about to talk about on this episode is grief, but some nuanced versions of grief. And I remember early in us dating, I had a little bit of a chip on my shoulder when it came to grief, where you said something about grief and I was like, well, you don't know grief like I do, because I'd lost my brother and at a young age, or when I was in high school, and I was in such deep grief that I was like, yo, cool, Dave, what do you know about grief? And I fully didn't make space for what is actually called like disenfranchised grief. And that's the grief of something you thought you would have that hasn't happened or won't happen, didn't happen. And in your case, that was after your divorce, like losing 50% of the time with your daughters, grieving that's a huge thing to grieve. And I didn't see it as that. And I think there was likely more you had to grieve that I'll let you unpack, but I was very...
You were like the kid that grew up in a difficult neighborhood. Like a lot of my friends that I grew up with from Oceanside are like this, where they there's a little chip on their shoulder about like growing up in the hood.
Yes.
And it's like, well, you're not from as bad as where I'm from, so therefore you can't really claim. There becomes a chip on our shoulder with,
100%.
with stuff like that.
Yeah, I was like, oh, grief? Yeah, what do you know about that?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm the crip when it comes to grief.
You had trauma ego.
I had trauma ego. My gosh, what a gross and weird thing that is, right?
It's real.
Yeah.
I just
it's
said
such
that.
Like it's totally like my pain is so big I couldn't like, how dare you say you have some?
Yeah.
That's really what it was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in this episode, we really wanted to talk about that side of grief, because I think there's so many ways that my life's been full of that, and yours has too. Like you've had to deal with a lot of similar grief, but maybe didn't quite validate it. Like
Totally.
I was kind of forced to. In some ways, it just hit me so head on. But it's really the grief of an idealized future, a future that you were planning on and your brain gets stuck on. Like, why is it so hard for some people if they're dating someone for a month and then that relationship breaks up? Like, why can that be so devastating, or maybe could be earth shattering to them, because they just saw so much and they allowed their brain to get to a place of focusing, hyper focus. A lot of the guys that I work with who are going through divorces or breakups, it's mainly that. It's the grief of an idealized future that they had, that they thought they'd have, that is no longer going to be the case. The house, they have these like certain memories that they hang on to. It's like the house that they were going to, do the garden in the yard, or
The retirement plan.
yeah, just little images that we attach our brains to that are really hard to let go of once you get stuck with that image in your brain that you think you're really aiming for, and then all of a sudden life throws curveballs.
Yeah, I would say the grief that I've experienced that is different from like loss of a person, loss of a loved one, is I think not finding my partner until I was in my like early 30s, I had always envisioned like I would be married in my late 20s. I would have, kids, by 30. And it was like timelines.
Mm.
And I think that that's my guess is it's more common in women than men, but that could just be because.
Men, it's a house. I'm going to own a home by this
Okay.
time, or
So
I'm
it's a
going to
different
be,
milestone.
or it could be marriage and kids as well. It definitely could be. But yeah, everyone has their different milestones. Or I'll be at this executive level, or I'll be making this much money by this age.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. And so we go through life having these visions for our future that are perfectly painted in our minds, and then they're not happening. And I think where I felt the grief the most would be going to weddings without a plus one and having that like, oh, like I'm not at this milestone yet and you're in this weird phase of like grieving that you're not where you wanted to be and you haven't reached that vision you had for yourself, mixed with but it could still happen. And so there's like hopefulness and this straddling in between of I'm not where I'm supposed to be, but it could still happen. And these like really mixed feelings of like grief, hopelessness, hope. And I think what I've learned is I've had to just validate those. And even still, there's grief I experience in, okay, now I do have my partner, but I am a second wife. So I grieve that I didn't have the first family with my partner. And you grieve the way that your life didn't unfold in the shoulds
Yes.
of this idealized version. And there's times where I do that, and I'm just letting people into my process because I know it's relatable, even though it's scary to say. So there's times that I do that. I go, it should have looked this way. And it's almost as if the grief of how it should look can morph into almost this shame of, I did something wrong that I didn't make it happen. I did something wrong that I wasn't married by the age I wanted to. I did something wrong that I'm 36 and I don't have biological children yet. And I think that shame largely comes from society's imprint of timelines and saying this is where you should be by now. And so if you're not hitting it, there can be this perception that you're doing something wrong. And I even remember feeling that when people would say like, why aren't you married yet? And it's like my mind would go, how do I answer that? And it would bring up these feelings of like, oh, something must be wrong with me, which is a shame-based way of thinking. And I give myself grace for that, because how else do you answer, why aren't you married yet? Like, that's kind of it's an odd question to ask someone, but my goodness, being married at 35, I can tell you I was asked that probably a good 50 times.
Wow.
It's very much well-intentioned people who have zero awareness, which
How do
I
you
would say there's like a little bit of resentment in me that would say it's an epidemic of just the unaware, not understanding. Like, how do you think someone would answer a question like that?
but it's also triggering shame. And I think if the thing is, you don't have to carry shame over it. Like I,
Absolutely not
yeah,
at all, because ultimately I don't think it is a thing of fault. I would actually say, what are timelines but society's dictated dates based on collective thought imposed from centuries old systems?
yeah. Like let's say somebody, gets into a relationship when they're in their 20s and they haven't figured out a healthy relationship really well. And so the relationship is a little bit toxic, but it also is, there's good there and they're struggling through that. And so neither partner is able to fully commit to being married because there's this dance going on and neither one of them's learned how to fix the relationship or have enough strength to leave it. And then eventually it breaks down and maybe somebody leaves and they're 35. There you go. That's how you can end up 35 and not married. Easy. There's so many ways
Yes, but
you can end up 35 and not married. And I got married at 20. I ended up being 35 and not married. Like,
right. But when you talk to someone who spent too much time in the wrong relationship, so often you hear them shame themselves for not knowing to leave sooner. I think that's so common in the women that I speak to of, it's my fault, I didn't leave sooner. And then they assume this kind of position of like shame of like, I'm bad that I didn't leave.
Yeah.
And
yeah, we can have a hard time processing this grief, I think is what we're trying to say. And I think, what do you think makes this type of grief so difficult?
I think it's that it's not accepted. So no one has a funeral for your dream of getting married and becoming a mom that you never achieve. The woman who's in her 50s and singles and always longed for that and it never happened for her is silently carrying grief. And that's just an example, but she's silently carrying this heavy weight of grief that is not societally accepted to openly talk about. There's almost like a tabooness with it because it's like, well, why didn't you find a partner? Why didn't you, make that happen for yourself? And so there can be like a little bit of a shame to it. Therefore, it's not talked about. And I think that grief is one of those emotions that, yes, you can validate it for yourself, but there's so much immense healing in someone seeing your pain and validating it. And
yeah, grief likes to be seen.
100%.
It likes to be witnessed for sure. You can process it on your own, but it definitely likes to be witnessed.
Yeah. And especially if someone who also understands it can witness it, that's really powerful too, because you really feel seen when someone's like, yeah, I see you. I felt that.
Yeah, it helps if somebody has experienced that similar thing. Like that's the medicine. If they really haven't, they may not be able to fully validate your experience in the same type of way that somebody who has.
Right.
It's the way it is. Like when I meet with guys who have gone through a divorce or are going through one, I can meet them with more compassion than very few people can meet them with the type of compassion that I can, because not only have I experienced it, but I've overcome it, and I can like meet them with compassion and also shine a light of like, you're going to be okay. And that's just a very comforting, and I can tell that's my medicine now. Like that's what I gift these guys with.
Hey friends, if you're struggling in your relationships, we want you to know we've been there and real change is possible.
So whether you're moving on from a breakup, working to strengthen your relationship, or just ready to show up differently in your life, we're here to help you out. click the link in our bio and book a free 30-minute consultation with us, and we'll see if we're a good fit to work together.
And if you're enjoying this episode, we would love it if you would like, subscribe, or share this podcast, because better relationships start with better conversations. Now back to the show. Right. And I think that I also want to back up a little bit to say there's a lot of different types of this. It's called disenfranchised grief. So that can look like grief of not hitting a milestone, whether that's marriage, kids, but that can also be never pursuing your actual dreams, never pursuing the career that you wanted to out of fear. And then you're, too far down the line to feel like you can change careers. And you're sitting in this office going, man, if I just would have picked up the camera and sold some of my photos and I could have had the photography job. There's that loss of dream as well. Where
Are you speaking that one on personal experience a little bit?
I think, yeah. Gosh, I've got all the grief. Maybe I am the expert, Dave.
Well, also, I want to say, do you think it's possible to get through life without this grief, like this type that we're talking about? I think that it's impossible to move through life without experiencing this thing, because no matter what, we were just talking the other day, and I was like, you had to basically grieve, if you will. This is kind of a weird way to say it, but you had to give up so much in order to be with me. You had to give up every guy in the entire world to be with me. And not to say that you have to grieve that, but you have to accept that and kind of grieve that. You get me, for all my flaws, all my pros and all my cons. But I think no matter which path we choose in life, we always seem to think that we can get away from grief, but you cannot escape it. If you choose to be with this person, that means you don't get to be with anyone else. If you choose to buy this house, if you get a 1-story, you don't get to live in a 2-story. If you get a 2-story, you always got to climb the stairs. There's just no way to get through life and not experience some level of grief. You could be the richest, most famous person in the world, and then you have to grieve the fact that you don't get to hide. You don't get to be unseen. You're so seen and you're so famous that you don't get to go to a restaurant and not have 50 people recognize you. You just have to grieve the path that you didn't get to take. None of us will experience all the lives. We have to experience this life and grieve the life that maybe we didn't get to experience always.
Right. And I think what is really tricky there, or at least was in the beginning for us, is I had to grieve a lot to be with you, but you also had to grieve a lot to be with me.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of envisioned your life being I'm going to live in my ambulance when I don't have the girls and travel the country. And you had to grieve that dream.
Yeah.
And so,
can I talk about that for a second? And then you
Sure.
talk about yours too.
Yeah.
Because I think it could be powerful to sit in our own experience in this grief. When I went through the divorce, I had to grieve an idealized future that I then had to pivot, right? So my mind had to, psychologically, I had to process, I'm no longer going to live in this house that I had remodeled. I had to process, where am I going next? And that was very difficult, but I was able to get this house and buy an old ambulance and fix it up and get it to a point where I could camp in it and stuff. And then I was creating this new idealized future of, yes, traveling, or the girls getting older, and then me, just traveling when they're a little older and not having a lot of responsibilities at 45, kind of just getting to be a kid, Peter Pan, or a kid again. And then I met you, and I loved the thought of life together with you, but in order to make space and carve out a future that we could build together, I definitely had to grieve the life as a single guy that I was kind of pursuing at the time, you know? And I think like that's very difficult to even tell you, but it's also just what I think a lot of relationships probably I could feel that it would be difficult to make space for that because we've had trouble making space for that a little bit as well. I had kids and got to experience that at a younger age. You didn't. I didn't get to travel you as much and you did. And so like we had to grieve the futures or the lives that we didn't get to experience. And I think we just had to really extend ourselves a lot to be able to see the other's experience because we did not come into this relationship with similar experiences. In some way, like there are some that we can resonate with, but a lot of different ones for sure.
Yeah. And I think where I was going with that is I was grieving things that I had to give up in order to be with you. You were grieving things you had to give up to be with me. And in the beginning, that was hard for both of us to not take a little personally.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, so you have to grieve this other life. Like, I'm not enough. And it was really healthy for us to get to a point where we both were like willing to not take it personal and see each other's pain and go, oh, I can imagine why you had this vision for being a single guy traveling around and having all these adventures and experiences and snowboarding around the world. Like that makes sense, especially to cope with the loss that you had been through. Of course, you're going to have a new dream. And
yeah, given
the pain that you had just been through, I can see why it wasn't like find the next girl to settle down with. Like that can make sense. And I can see you in that. In the beginning, I was like, ouch, like we would rather just go. And I think part of why I took it a little personal is because I had traveled the world and I had done all the things.
Yeah.
And
you rode the elephants in Thailand, you swam with the sharks in South Africa, like you did all the things.
Yeah, I've climbed the mountains. Like I've done it, and not from like an egotistical way. I'm actually saying I've done it all to the extent that I know that it's not where true happiness comes from.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not, pursuing pleasure is not actually a meaningful life.
Yeah.
And so I was like, being with me is going to be a more meaningful life. Like the fact you just want to go chase all those things. Like I've done that. I know it isn't going to leave you fulfilled. There was like almost an offensiveness to me in that in the beginning. And I had to come to like a place of acceptance of, oh, you had that dream and that's okay that he had that dream. That doesn't say anything about me that he had a different dream before he met me.
Yeah, and I was not ever, like, I never told you I want to break up with you and go live that dream. Like, I always had the heart, to my knowledge, maybe I didn't do it well sometimes, but I think just bringing you my grief was important for you to see it. You know, like I needed you to feel truly seen and loved. It was just helpful when you could kind of validate that and appreciate that I was, you know, giving up on some dreams in order to be here with you. And also on the reverse side, you know, validate your grief and experience and how hard life's been for you in different ways and what you're giving up to be with me. You know, we just had to kind of see each other in that grief, or else we'd always be in like a energetic fight of who gave up more to be with each other, or like not validating each other, not feeling seen by one another. And I think that's when our relationship actually got a lot healthier, was when we could develop the emotional maturity. Because I think every relationship's trying to fight to be seen in that way. Like every person wants to be seen in that way, but because it feels appreciated. Like you feel appreciated when someone can validate your grief and your decisions to be in the relationship, right? But what is so difficult is when your wounds and just your lack of emotional maturity, it causes you to not have the conversation in the right way. So I'm trying to get validated in my grief, but I might be saying it in a passive aggressive way or just poking at you. And then you're not able to give me what I need because I'm not actually able to say I'm grieving a future that I had planned without you. And it's just difficult. Like that takes a lot of maturity to
Yeah.
just say that.
And that's why when we first met, we were not very emotionally mature.
Yeah.
And it was so painful when both of us were saying that to each other that it would almost cause fights because our own insecurities would come out. Like, what do you mean you're grieving a life that without me?
Yeah. I think of couples. This is so common, I think, for like a stay-at-home mom. I mean, we talk about the mental load and we talk about two people who are just on different wavelengths of their experience. And this is also exactly what we're talking about. This idealized grief comes with that. If you are a stay-at-home mom and you want to be a stay-at-home mom, you probably, maybe some of them never dreamed of having a career, and that's fine. And so you don't have to grieve it. But I would say a lot of them probably had another plan also, that then it's not that they don't want to be home with their kids. It's not that they don't want to be spending time with them, but they have to grieve that the career that they're not experiencing now, the self of accomplishment that comes with that, the talking to adults during the day. Like there's so much grief that can come along with, I think, choosing to be a stay-at-home mom. And I think when that woman tries to bring her grief to the husband to be witnessed, he's probably like offended. Like, well, I work so hard for you to be in this job, for you to get to do the thing that you want to do. So you're not even happy. It's like, no, there's more. We need to understand the complexity of emotions. Two things can be true at the same time. We can be so happy about choosing a career as a stay-at-home mom and also grieve the career we never got. And that we have to be able to make space for these emotional complexities, or else we shut each other out and we can't see each other anymore. And the husband might want the wife to be a stay-at-home mom, so then he goes and works in a job that might be more difficult or more not the job of his dreams. He has more of a financial burden on him, so he can't be the creative guy that he wants to be, maybe, or so he swallows that pill and he has to grieve the creative venture or the life that he wanted or the whatever it is, right? And then he has trouble bringing her this grief. And we need to not take it so personal. We need to just be like, yeah, of course you would be grieving that. That makes a lot of sense. I'm sure you're still happy with the choice you made, and some days maybe you're not, but more days than not, hopefully this is the choice. Like, hopefully this is the choice that you wanted to make, and that you're, or else let's change it up. But I think that's a good example of like two people grieving a life that you don't get to live. It can steal your joy. It can steal your contentment in the life that you have if you don't process it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think processing it, to me, the first step really is just naming it. Actually being able to say, I am grieving this. I'm grieving that I'm not where I thought I would be. I'm grieving my career. I'm grieving that I took this route in my life instead of this route. Whatever it is, actually acknowledging that grief and allowing yourself to sit in it is medicine, is part of healing. And then once you allow yourself to feel the grief, you can then enter in a place where you accept reality. But you have to allow yourself to feel the grief to reach the place of acceptance. Otherwise, it kind of comes out sideways, and it's bitterness and it's resentment and it's anger, or it's not unhappiness in the life that you have. And I think the path to peace is through feeling the feelings that you don't really even want to feel, but you have to. You have to feel. And what is grief? It's loss. It's loss of what you thought you were going to have. And that can seem silly. Like you didn't even have it. So why are you grieving it?
Mm-hmm.
And I actually read, and I forget who it was some doctor was saying that you actually have to grieve the loss of an idealized future as much as the loss of a person. Because if you can attach to it that much,
Mm-hmm.
to where you actually have to fully grieve it and allow yourself to feel the sadness and the weight of that loss. And I think that actually brings me to an interesting question that you asked me right before we popped on. You said, if you have to grieve this idealized future so much, should we still dream of a future and have these like visions of what we want for our future? And I would actually answer that to say, yeah, I still dream.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that because it might not happen, we shouldn't have hopes for it to. But I've learned to be less attached to outcomes. And for me, I always try my hardest to detach from like the dates things have to happen by, and allow there to be nuance.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I always wanted to have a family. Did I think it would look like ours does with stepdaughters? No. But if I would have said it has to look the way my vision is, then I would miss out on the beauty of what we have.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we attach so tightly to how things should be, always say should be in the key word, because it should to me always implies standards set by typically someone else, like society saying the should. When we attach to what the way things should be, we don't allow them to be what is.
Yeah.
And so I think there's this kind of beautifully nuanced way of, yeah, have dreams and have a vision that you want to work towards. Absolutely. But let it unfold in ways that you didn't expect, because it can be even more beautiful.
Yeah. Hold it with an open hand. Like, I think it's kind of similar to the question of, would you rather have loved and lost than never loved at all? Like, people will say that, it's like, because grief is so painful that it's like almost you'd rather never love at all. But that's not the answer. The answer is not to not live and not experience. Like, experience in the fullest. Love as hard as you can. But no, nothing is permanent. Like, impermanence is the name of the game. So, if it's a dream of a house or a dream of a whatever it is, owning a ranch, or like, I don't know what it, could be, but or retiring in a certain country or having a boat or a certain car, it's like, don't get so stuck that you lose sight of what's right in front of you. And that's when we put the idealized future so much more important than the present. then we end up getting it a little backwards. So like, was going through a divorce really difficult? Yes. But if I could have been more present minded with my daughters and not so stuck in the ways of an idealized future, I might have recovered faster. I might have salvaged some of those years that were the transition years, you know, not that I didn't, but I might have been able to softer land. And I think just holding that and going like, you know, it's not always going to work out the way we want it to, but that doesn't mean don't dream. Because if we don't dream, we don't aim. And if we don't aim, then we're not going to accomplish anything. Like, so we have to dream, we have to aim for goals. And we also just have to hold it in an open hand that it may look very, very different than we ever thought it would. And that's so beautiful and awesome. And just like, yeah, and just take it all in.
That's something we talk about so much, is holding things in both hands. Grieve the loss of the future you envisioned, but don't lose sight of the beauty of the present.
Mm-hmm.
Because, yeah, you might have lost the future family you thought you were going to have, but that doesn't mean the one you are yet to build or will be building isn't going to be less beautiful. I think it's just learning to hold it all in both hands. And that's what we talk about a lot on this podcast is grieve, feel the loss, but also, in the other hand, appreciate what you do have and the future you are going to build. And you can feel both at the same time. You can be so sad for what you lost and so hopeful and optimistic for what is yet to come. And I think that's actually kind of the messiness of disenfranchised grief is, I think when you lose like a loved one, you're not like yeah, you might be hopeful for seeing them in the afterlife, but it's not like a hopefulness of like, oh, the good to come. Whereas with disenfranchised grief, there can still be hope for what you're still going to create. And I think that's kind of why people don't really validate it almost. The example being if you haven't gotten married by a certain age or if you haven't had children, your grief isn't validated because it could still happen. Whereas things that are more final, people are more willing to like validate.
Yeah, and that's the difficult part of it. When you're still hopeful, you know, I've met guys who are like a year or two separated from their wife, they have kids, and they're still hopeful that it's going to work out. And it's like they can't grieve yet. So they're kind of caught in this middle, like, what do I do? And it's just limbo. And that can be in a really unhealthy place if you aren't making decisions. You almost have like analysis paralysis. You don't want to close the door and grieve something, so you're leaving it open, but you're just that takes a lot of emotional maturity to feel that and experience that. I almost feel like that's the definition of emotional maturity, is just being able to experience multiple emotions at the same time, being able to allow multiple emotions to be true at the same time, because we assign meaning to it. So if I'm grieving something, then I'm assigning that I'm accepting that is over, or that that loss is painful, or it's not good. It could even be like that relationship's not good. But emotional maturity says, well, there was good parts, and I can take those, and you know, it doesn't all have to be bad or all good. It's like I can allow two things to be true at the same time, or three or four, and have total different emotions. Or I can allow myself to laugh at a funeral without feeling guilt because somebody said a funny joke about the experience that we had in third grade or something. You know, like there are moments where emotions are okay. And like we can allow ourselves to feel multiple emotions at the same time. We can have humor within grief. We can have sadness within happiness, and it all enmeshed together, and allowing ourselves to not assign the meaning always, and is kind of just the definition of emotional maturity to me.
Absolutely. Just easier said than done.
Yeah. Yeah. You kind of almost just have to experience it and not always logically make meaning of every emotion you feel.
Yeah, and I think emotional maturity too touches back on what we said earlier of you are allowed to grieve the life you thought you were going to have without me personalizing it. I think it can I think emotional maturity is allowing someone else's feelings to not necessarily take them personally or feel like they're being like projected onto you. I think is a big part of emotional maturity as well.
Yeah, and that comes with not assigning meaning. Like I can allow you to grieve the loss of all that you lost in choosing me, and still know that that was the decision that you wanted to make, and that, and feel confident like that. It doesn't have to say anything about me. But when I assign meaning, like, oh, if you're grieving that, then that means you don't want it. This is the core belief I think a lot of people have. You would only be grieving if you weren't happy with the outcome. And that's just not true. You can be happy with an outcome and still make room for grief of the outcome that didn't exist. That
Yeah.
needs to be real. Like let's wake up to that, you know?
I think the best example you gave of that is the stay-at-home mom grieving her career, but also the career mom grieving the time away from her young kids. There's no right, there's no wrong. There's grief on both sides, and it's valid on both sides.
Yeah, the biggest mistake we make is thinking that if we make the right choice, if we do the thing we really want to do, it will come without grief.
Totally.
And it will
Because
never come without grief.
the creative who is living this career of their dreams, but has to endure the financial storms of paycheck to paycheck life of a creative,
Ups and
wins my
downs.
next paycheck coming, is sitting here grieving the stability of the corporate 9 to 5 401k job
Health insurance,
and
all
is
that.
going, couldn't I have just gone the secure route? But then the guy in the cubicle is like, man, couldn't I have just pursued my passions? And so no matter what option we take, there is a little bit of grief. And I think the heart of the episode is acknowledge that and feel it and know that it's okay to feel it. And that is healing. Healing is feeling the grief.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we shame ourselves by thinking that we shouldn't need to grieve it because we should just be happy with the choices we made. Or we should be happy because we chose to move to the city we wanted to move to, but now we're not living by family, or we, whatever it is. It's like every decision will come with grief. If you have a kid, you're going to grieve your time like crazy. If you don't have a kid, you're going to grieve that you never had the kid, or you never got to have another kid, or whatever it is. If you buy a new house, you're going to grieve that new mortgage payment like crazy. And be jealous of the renters that are renting down by the beach in the 1-bedroom apartment living life. It's just the nature of life is to understand that we are living human beings that are constantly missing out on things. And I think if we fear missing out, we're not allowing ourselves to just miss out. What we fear most will control us.
Oof.
So if we don't process it and and fear that outcome happening or not happening, it's going to control us and allow us to miss out on what we're actually doing. Like, just make your choices, live by them, learn from your mistakes. And that's all you can do. I have to give myself permission. I had to give myself permission to say goodbye to my old house when I moved out. I had worked harder. I've never worked harder on anything other than maybe this house now. But like at that point in time, it was so hard for me, like an insane mission of grief. And I just had to allow myself to go, you learned some lessons and you got to just move on, you know? But by not being aware of it, we can really fall in the trap of just trying to avoid grief. And when what we fear most will control us. So if we're always trying to avoid the grief, we're going to be stuck running and avoiding instead of playing. We're going to be playing defense instead of offense and going for the thing that we want, knowing that even if we get the thing we want, we're going to have to grieve the things we don't have. Always. It's just the law.
You know, as we wrap the episode, this is a little unconventional, but I just want to say to those that are listening, if this episode resonated and there is something you're grieving in your life, which probably is everyone is grieving something, I just see you in it, and allow yourself to feel that and make space for those feelings and offer yourself compassion for maybe it's a decision you made that you think you took the wrong path or stayed in a relationship too long or made a wrong career decision. You weren't risky enough. Whatever it is, you made the best choice with where you were at that time. And there's no shame in that. There's no reason to feel shame. Your life can still be beautiful no matter what decision you made that you are regretting right now or whatever it is that you're grieving. Both can exist, but I just wanted to validate that grief is so unbelievably painful. So if you're sitting in it, just sending you love, and we see you.
Love that.
Love you.
Love you.
Bye.
Bye.